The steel thermos caught the morning light as Ollie raised it to his mouth. Celia moved before she thought. She came across the marble island in one stride, hip cracking against the corner, and tore the thermos from the boy's lips. Tea asked out in a brown ribbon and slapped the counter, running into the grout lines, dripping off the edge. Ollie gasped. The cup rolled. Somewhere a chair scraped and went silent. Bennett Frost's hand was still in the air. His fingers hung an inch above the lid, where it had spun to a stop, frozen mid-reach, as if the room had grabbed his wrist and held it. He did not move. Nobody moved. In the doorway, Leander Rourke filled the frame, coat still on, keys in one fist. He had come down for nothing, a glass of water, a look at his son, and now he stood watching the tea run off his counter, and his night nurse breathing hard, with the thermos clutched to her chest, like something she meant to die over. Ollie whispered. Celia. She turned the thermos upside down over the sink. Rewind 11 minutes. She should have been asleep. The night shift ended at 7, and it was 10 past. And Celia Callahan had learned in 6 weeks in this house that the smart move was to be gone by then. Up the back stairs, into the small room off the nursery. Door shut before the day people arrived. She kept to herself. The Rourke house ran on people who did. But Ollie had wanted breakfast early. And Ollie, at 7 years old and motherless, got what he wanted from her. And so she had stayed to butter his toast. Bennett Frost came down at 7, exactly, the way he did everything. Exactly. The new tutor. 3 weeks in, and already the housekeeper called him a gift. But when he entered a room, the room went quiet in a way nobody named. He wore a pressed shirt at 7 in the morning. He set his leather folder on the island, squared it to the edge, and smiled at Ollie with a warmth that everyone in this house found reassuring, and that made the skin on the back of Celia's neck lift. With a fear she could not have said aloud. "Good morning, champion," Bennett said. He filled the kettle in the silence. He moved to the cabinet, took down the steel travel thermos, Ollie's, the one with the dented cap the boy loved, and poured. Mid-pour, his hand stopped, then moved again. He carried it to the boy the way you carry something to a child. Low, easy, both hands. And Celia watched the way he half-turned his shoulder as he passed the counter, the way his thumb pressed the lid down and gave it a quarter turn back. A small thing, a nothing thing, the kind of thing 100 people would never see. She saw it. She froze. Her stomach dropped through the floor. "Careful, it's hot," Bennett said, and set it down by the boy's plate. Ollie lifted it, 2 hands the way he'd been taught. He put it to his mouth. Celia was already moving. Now the thermos was empty and dripping in the sink, and the whole kitchen had gone dead quiet. The particular stillness of a room where something has happened that no one has a name for yet. "What?" Leander said. "Are you doing?" It was not a question. His voice never rose. That was the frightening thing about the man, the calm of him, the flat grey patience of a person who had buried a wife a year ago and locked the world out and would let nothing closer to his son than his own reach allowed. Celia had heard the staff talk in whispers. He watches the watchers. She was one of the watched. She could not tell him. She stood there with her hand still shaking and the answer burning a hole in her throat. And every true word she had, the way he turned the cap. "I've seen that turn. I know what that turn means." Every one of them opened a door in her own past, she had walked out of, and swore she'd nailed shut. So she said nothing. She looked at the empty thermos. She looked at the tea going down the drain. She grabbed it, Ollie said in a small voice. She spilled my tea. Bennett lowered his hand at last. He laughed, soft, easy, the sound of a reasonable man in an unreasonable moment. It's all right, Ollie. Accidents happen. He looked at Celia with clean concern. Are you feeling all right? You look pale. That, more than anything, told her she was right. Leander said, everyone but the nurse out. They went. Bennett last, unhurried, pausing to write the folder he did not need to write. At the door he stopped, one beat, listening. Then he was gone. He stayed on probation. That was the verdict Leander gave her, 4 minutes later in the flat voice. Standing too close. One more incident. He stopped there, the sentence unfinished, which was worse than any threat. He did not fire her, and she did not dare ask why. She kept the small room. She kept the night shift. She kept her mouth shut, but she slept with her door locked now. What the household knew of Celia Callahan was this, and only this. She'd come from a hospice upstate. She took the shifts no one wanted. She didn't cry at anything, and she watched the boy sleep, like it was the only job on earth. What they knew of Leander, they knew from the outside, that he had loved his wife, that she was a year in the ground, that he'd built a cage of safety around Ollie and let the boy breathe only inside it. Nobody said the wife's name. Nobody said how she'd died. The silence around her name was load-bearing. That night past 2, Celia heard it. A hiss, thin, dry, coming up through the pantry vent by the back stairs, rising and stopping, rising and stopping. She froze under the blanket, not daring to breathe. Then she got up. She followed it down. Twice she stopped on the stairs. Sure, other footsteps had stopped with her. The sound was the old dumbwaiter, its rope worn, the shaft breathing when the house settled. Nothing. Harmless. She almost laughed. But her light swept the pantry shelves on the way back, and she stopped. One shelf had been wiped clean, a pale ring in the dust where a supply tin had stood for years. Gone now, wiped after. Behind her, upstairs, she heard the tutor's door click softly shut. In the kitchen that morning, before he left, Bennett Frost had smiled at no one and slipped the dented thermos lid into his pocket. She did not sleep after that. She lay in the dark, with her eyes open, and let the house go quiet around her. And when the quiet was total, she went down again, past the pantry, to the little office off the kitchen, where the deliveries were logged. The book was where it always sat. She turned the pages by phone light, slow, until she found it, a line for Tuesday last, scratched out, not crossed, erased. Someone had taken a blade to the paper and lifted the ink clean, leaving a soft grey bruise in the page, and the ghost of 2 words she couldn't read. She stood with that a moment, breathing. Then she opened the bin under the desk. Carbon copies, balled up, coffee-stained. She smoothed them one by one until she found the courier slip, a duplicate, faint blue, the top copy long gone. Lab grade, it said. Priority. And where the recipient's name should have been, nothing. A blank. Someone had ordered something into this house and left no name on the door it came to. Behind her, the corridor was dead quiet, too quiet. Her hands were steady now. That was the old training talking, the part of her she'd buried, and she hated how easily it woke. A floorboard gave overhead. She froze until it went silent. She dug deeper, and the last slip came up half-burned, the edge black and curling. The delivery time still legible, 2 a, the hour the house breathed. "You're up late." She turned. Leander stood in the office doorway, and she had not heard him come, which put a cold fear in her sharper than the slip. He crossed the floor without hurry, and took the burned paper from her fingers before she could hide it. He read it. His face did not change. The silence stretched. Then he set it down and looked at her, and his voice dropped to the flat, cold register she'd learned to dread. "Ollie is mine to protect. Mine. If you touch him again without my word, if you go through my house again in the dark, you answer to me, not to a court, not to anyone. Me, do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "Good." But he did not leave. He stood there a breath too long, reading her the way he read the slip, as if she too were a page someone had tried to erase. She went back up. She did not sleep. Every tick of the house stopped her breath. The housekeeper, Mrs. Doyle, liked to talk while she folded, and Celia had learned to be near her without seeming to be. The tutor's references, Mrs. Doyle said, were the best she'd ever seen. A university, a diplomat's family. Letters signed by people with titles. "Not a mark on him," she said, snapping a sheet flat. "Not a mark." Suddenly that seemed the wrong kind of clean. "There was a nurse before me," Celia said, casual, folding. Mrs. Doyle's hands slowed. "Catherine. Nice girl." She left quick. A pause, and something crossed her face and was gone. There'd been words, her and Mr. Frost, over something in the nursery. Next morning she was packed and gone before breakfast, and no one heard from her again. Her voice had dropped to a whisper, her eyes on the door. Odd that. She loved the boy. She loved the boy. Celia kept her eyes on the linen. She did not ask the next question, the one that stopped in her throat. Gone where? Because a good erasure leaves no forwarding address. And she already knew that. The dog got loose in the yard that afternoon. One of the kennel shepherds slipped its chain and came across the lawn, low and snapping, hackles up, straight for the boy at the fountain. Celia was too far, fear stopping her heart. The handler shouted, and Leander, coat off, sleeves rolled, 20 feet away, was there before the sound finished, stepping his whole body between the dog and his son, one arm sweeping Ollie behind his legs, standing his ground as the animal skidded and cowered at the wall of him. He didn't flinch, he didn't shout, he just stood, breathing, one hand flat on the top of Ollie's head until the handler dragged the dog off. For 1 second, Celia saw the man under the ice, the fear that had made him fast, the love that made the fear. Then he straightened, and the ice came back down over it, and he caught her watching. Neither of them said a word. That night the smell was on Ollie's blanket. She noticed it tucking him in. Faint, sweet bitter, a note under the wool that shouldn't be there. She waited until the boy slept. Then she followed it, nose to the cold air of the corridor, down the wing she had no reason to enter, to the tutor's study, where the door stood an inch open, and the cabinet inside breathed the same note into the dark. The corridor behind her was dead quiet, and the smell grew with every step. Bitter almond, thin as a thread. She went white in the doorway. Her breath stopped. Her body knew it before her mind would say the word. Knew it the way you know a face in a crowd, the way the training she'd buried came up cold and complete. She did not touch the cabinet. She stepped back into the hall and stood with her hand pressed to her own mouth and let no sound out at all. "You keep strange hours." Bennett was on the stairs behind her, unhurried, a book under his arm. She had not heard him climb. His silence was its own warning. He smiled. "Can't sleep either. It's this house. Too much history." He tilted his head. "You know Mr. Rourke has a rival. Vincent. Terrible business, the two of them." He watched her face while he said the name. Light as a card laid on a table, waiting to see if it landed anywhere in her. "But then, you wouldn't know about any of that. You're just the nurse." "I'm just the nurse," she said. He went up. She stayed very still until his door clicked, and then she made herself breathe. Ollie would not sleep without her the next night. "Stay," he said, and she stayed and read him a story she made up as she went low until his eyes went heavy. Then he reached under his pillow and pressed something small and cold into her palm. A pocket watch, silver, the face cracked across. "It was Mama's," he whispered. "You can hold it, just tonight." She closed her hand around the warm, cold weight of it, and for 3 breaths, the whole terrible house went quiet and simple and small. Then something settled in the corridor, and she froze, waiting. Nothing came. Downstairs, before sleep, she made herself finish the one loop she could close. The courier slip, 2A. No name on the door. She'd been afraid it pointed out to Vincent, to some enemy at the gate. It didn't. The delivery time matched the log erased in a hand she'd seen sign for parcels a dozen times. Whatever came at 2A, M had been received by someone already inside these walls. The thought dried her mouth with fear. That narrowed the world to a handful of faces, and she knew which one smiled too well. At dawn, she swapped the dented thermos for a plain one from the pantry and hid the real one behind the false back of her own dresser drawer, listening for a step that might stop outside her door. Bennett noticed by breakfast. She watched him reach for the shelf where it always sat, find the wrong one, and go still. And for the first time, the easy smile did not come. The kitchen went dead quiet between them. She had smelled it before. That was the secret she'd swallowed. For 6 weeks. Celia Callahan had spent 4 years as a poison response nurse in a military hospice, and she had knelt beside a dying man once, whose breath came sweet and bitter as crushed almonds, and had learned in the worst way what that smell meant and how fast it worked. 90 seconds, sometimes less, not even time to whisper a name. That was why her hand moved before her mind did in the kitchen. She hadn't seen a threat. She'd smelled one, on Ollie's cup, the morning the tutor turned the lid. She knew the cabinet now. She knew the courier slip. And when she pulled the tutor's forged references from Mrs. Doyle's file that night and held them to the lamp, she saw the same practiced hand that had erased the delivery log, and understood, in one cold drop of fear, that Bennett Frost had not replaced the last nurse. He had removed her. Catherine hadn't quit, and the references, the diplomat's family, the titles, all of it built, all of it false. A costume stitched to walk a killer through the front door. He was here to finish something old, the whole Rourke line, and he had started with a boy's thermos. She turned to run for Leander, and the wing door slammed shut behind her. The bolt drove home. She spun. Bennett stood at the far end of the nursery corridor, calm as ever, one hand on a valve she hadn't known was there, and the corridor filled with a low, hiss she recognized from 100 nights of listening. Gas, not the dumbwaiter now, the real thing, fed up through the old lines, and her and Ollie sealed inside with it. "You should have stayed the nurse," he said, and was gone. She grabbed Ollie off the bed and pressed her sleeve over his face, dragging him low, where the air was thin and clean, and pounded on the door. The door blew inward. Leander came through the smoke of it, with a breaching charge, still smoking in one fist, and a gun in the other. No fear in him. Only the flat, murderous calm, firing down the corridor at the shapes. Moving there. Bennett's men, 2 of them, dropping. He did not tremble. He advanced, but the gas was in the air, and she saw him take a breath and sway, one hand going to the wall, the poison, finding him the way it had found the man in the hospice. Leander, she got him by the collar. "Breathe out. All of it. Now. Ollie, breathe out." She screamed the sequence at him the way she'd screamed it at orderlies in another life. The count, the hold, the head between the knees, the words steadying him even as his aim stayed level. And put down the 3rd man in the smoke. He held. She held him. For 1 second in the ruin of the wing his eyes found hers, and something passed between them that neither had time to name. Then Ollie went pale in her arms. Not the gas, his lips. She'd swapped the thermos. But Bennett had slipped a second dose past the guards, into the boy's water glass at supper, and it was working now, and the real thermos, with the sample she needed to match the antidote, was 3 floors down behind a false drawer. "He's dosed," she said. "Bitter almond. I need the kit. I need the tin from the pantry. I need now." Leander didn't ask how she knew. He looked at his son, going grey, and at the woman holding him, and he made the only choice he could make. "Tell me where," she told him. He went. Fast, a shadow down the smoking stair, and the silence he left behind was the enemy now. She laid Ollie flat, and worked with her hands and her breath, and everything the buried years had taught her, counting, keeping the small chest moving, and the boy's mother's cracked watch ticked in her pocket against her hip like a heart that wouldn't quit. Each time his breath stopped, hers stopped with it. By the time the guards flooded the wing, Bennett Frost was gone, through the yard, past the kennels, into the dark, no body left behind, only a service door standing open on the night. They got Ollie down to the car. Unconscious, breathing, alive by inches, the house behind them had gone dead quiet. And when Celia went to her room for the drawer and the real thermos, she found her locker in the staff hall already open. There was a note inside, folded once, laid square on top of her things, in a hand she had never used. "You smelled it. So did I. Which of us do you think he sent first?" She read it twice, frozen, then made herself move. She left the note where it lay. There was no time for what it meant. Ollie's pulse was a moth under her fingers when Leander set the pantry tin and her kit on the nursery floor, and she was already moving, tearing the cabinet in the tutor's study open with a fire iron, spilling his little glass ampules across the desk. One shattered, cracking the silence like a shot. She knew the counter to bitter almond. She'd mixed it in the field with less. Sulfur donor, a nitrite, the amyl vial to buy the minutes. Her hands flew, sorting, snapping necks off glass. The last compound wasn't there. She stopped. The one thing that made the rest work. The thiosulfate, locked in the small steel vault, set into the wall behind the desk, and the keypad dead, and Bennett long gone with the code. Ollie's breath was going shallow behind her. A guard's shadow filled the study door, and she ignored it. She had 90 seconds, maybe less, and a wall she couldn't open. Then she saw the ledger on the desk, his book, the forged names, the courier lines, the contract, and, she knew without opening it, the pages where a killer keeps his old work. Catherine's name, hers, maybe. The proof of everything Bennett was, and everything she'd buried. The vault had a fail-safe. Fire in the room dropped the bolt. A fail-open, so nothing burned inside a locked box while a man died outside it. She put the tutor's lighter to his ledger and held it to the smoke detector until the alarm shrieked and the sprinkler hissed and the vault bolt thunked back. The pages caught, curled, went to ash. Her past, Catherine's proof, all of it, gone up in the same breath. She didn't watch it burn. She had the vial in her fist and was already back on her knees over the boy. Careful nurse. Bennett was in the doorway, come back to finish it, a gun low at his side. That was the only copy that named you. I know, she said, and drew up the dose. He raised the gun. Leander came out of the smoke behind him with no fear in his face, and no waiting in his body, a full head taller than the ice he wore, a patriarch in his own house, and closed a hand over the tutor's wrist, and turned it to the ceiling as the shot went wild into plaster. He drove Bennett to the wall. He did not shoot him. He held him there, forearm across the man's throat, gun taken and reversed, while the tutor's men lay still in the corridor, and the first sirens climbed the drive. You came into my house, Leander said, very quiet, and put your hand on my son. He let the pressure build until Bennett's face went dark. Then, deliberate, he eased it, because the law was at the gate, and a dead man tells no one who sent him. You'll live. You'll tell me the name nobody's said yet. He pinned him kneeling for the men who came through the door in vests, and handed him over breathing, wrists bound, the smile finally, wholly gone. Behind them, Celia drove the antidote home. The room held its breath. Ollie's chest lay still 1 second, 2, long enough that her own heart stopped with it. And then the small ribs lifted, dragged in air, lifted again, and his lashes fluttered, and a thin thread of color crept back into his lips. His pulse steadied under her fingers into something that wanted to keep going. She sat back on her heels in the wet and the ash and shook once, hard, and let no sound out. Celia, the boy whispered. I'm here, she said. I'm right here. Then Leander was on his knees beside her in the ruined nursery, and he pulled them both into him, the boy against his chest, and her, his arm hard across her back, gathering her in with a fierceness that had nothing of ice left in it. He held them like a man closing a door on the world. Around them, the wing hung dead quiet, and for once the quiet held no fear. No one takes what's mine, he said, low against her hair, the words rough and absolute. Not him, not the next one they send. His hand pressed flat between her shoulder blades, holding her there, claiming her in the same grip that shielded his son. Not you, either. You don't disappear like the last one. Not now, you hear me, not now. She felt the cracked watch in her pocket press, between them, still ticking. Down in the drive, the sirens cut to silence, and boots came up the stair. And somewhere out past the kennels, a service door still swung open on the dark where one question waited, unanswered, in a hand she'd never seen before tonight. But here, in the smoke, the boy was breathing, and the man would not let her go. By morning it was over, or looked like it. Bennett Frost went into federal custody, with his forged life laid bare. The contract, the courier orders, Catherine's file, all of it. Mrs. Doyle, who had signed for the 2A.M. parcel and wiped the shelf, was taken from the kitchen in cuffs before the kettle boiled, weeping that she hadn't known what was in the tin. The kitchen went silent behind her. No name that mattered walked free. Leander found Celia in the ruined nursery as the light came up gray through the smoke-stained glass. "You can go," he said. "No ice in it now, just the plain truth of a man who owed. Your name is clear. The debt's paid. No one in this house will stop you, not me, not anyone. Say the word, and there's a car." She didn't answer with words. She crossed to Ollie's bed, where the boy slept breathing, and hung his mother's cracked watch back on its nail above the pillow, and set it swinging. "I don't leave patients I've kept breathing," she said. He looked at her a long moment. Then he pressed the real Thermos, the dented one, hers now to guard, into her hands, and closed her fingers over it, and let the warmth of that stay a beat longer than it needed to. It should have been the end. But on the third night, a black sedan idled past the gate, with its lights off, too long, then rolled on before the guard reached it. And in the morning, a plain white envelope sat on the mat. No stamp, no sender, no name. The flap tucked, not sealed, as if whoever left it wanted her to know they'd been close enough to walk right up to the door. She stood over it with the Thermos in one hand and did not pick it up. Her skins crawled with the old fear. Behind her, the house was quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath. The boy was safe. The man would not let her go. And somewhere out past the kennels, someone was still counting. Would you have snatched that Thermos from Ollie's lips too, or trusted the smiling tutor everyone praised? Tell me in the comments.